Hello and welcome to TRIGGERnometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kisin.
And this is the show for you if you're bored with people arguing on the internet over subjects they know nothing about. At TRIGGERnometry, we don't pretend to be the experts, we ask the experts.
Our brilliant guest this week is a journalist and the author of Hired, 6 months undercover in low-wage Britain. James Bloodworth, welcome to TRIGGERnometry.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you, man. Before we get into the interview, just tell everybody who you are, how are you where you are, what's been your journey through life to this point?
So I'm a journalist and author. My journey through life. Well, I failed my schooling. Failed my GCSEs.
That's how journalism works, guys.
Yeah, but you can all do it. And then I went back to college when I was 23 as like a mature student. College, university. Then writing was kind of the only thing I was capable of doing. And so then, yeah, I did this, and I enjoy it. It's kind of the one thing that's kind of my passion, but it's also my work as well, which is cool.
And you kind of opened with a bit of self-deprecation, but the book you've written is actually incredibly important. And we were just chatting as you got here about the fact that left or right, and you're left-wing, and we'll get into that. A lot of our viewers keep saying to us, you need to get more left-wing people on. So we're glad you've agreed to come on.
Having said that, I bet they're going to start moaning the moment.
Yeah. Oh no, he's actually left-wing. But it's good to have you on. And as I say, I think your book is incredibly important wherever you are on the political spectrum, because some of the stuff that you talk about, some of the things that your investigative journalism uncovered, it's very serious, and it's a big problem for society, especially going forward. So for anyone who hasn't read your book yet, which I'm sure they'll get after this interview, tell us what you did. What is the book about? What did you do? What was the process?
So in end of 2015, I had this kind of idea of a book about kind of low-wage Britain, about what was going on in the economy. So you cast your mind back to 2015. David Cameron was Prime Minister. He was talking a lot about, the economy is on the road to recession, recovery after a long recession, record number of people in work, etc., etc. But behind the scenes, it was a bit more disconcerting, the picture. So there was a big rise in the number of people on 0 hours contracts. There were a lot more people working in something that was being called the gig economy. So Uber drivers, Deliveroo, riders, couriers, etc. And they were a big rise in self-employment. But it was a bit, the world of that was a bit murky in terms of whether they're really self-employed or whether they were employed by these companies. And so I'd done many jobs like that myself 10 years previously. So I wanted to kind of go back a decade later after this big recession we'd had and kind of see what had changed in that kind of world of work. And I didn't feel like you really got a sense of it from, you can do your journalistic kind of detours you go on a day, you go to visit some kind of downtrodden town for like a day, you go and hang around, like interview some factory workers for a day. But I thought like I was really kind of inspired by kind of the immersive journalism that people like George Orwell, Polly Toynbee, Barbara Ehrenreich had done before, where you fully immerse yourself into that world, and then you can really paint a true picture of what it's actually like to work in those jobs, live in those towns, and kind of lead that lifestyle of the so-called kind of precariat in the British economy. And
what did you find?
Well, all sorts of things. I mean, I was worried. A part of me was worried when I set out to write the book that it might be, the first place I got a job was an Amazon warehouse, and I thought, I was worried that my book was going to be boring. I'd worked in a warehouse before when I was younger, and I was worried is it going to be like boring? What am I going to write about? But the book pretty much wrote itself. As soon as I started the work, there were so many kind of shocking things going on that the book essentially wrote itself. So I mean, my first job was at Amazon. I kept a diary every day I was working there, and the first day I remember writing in this diary that the atmosphere of the Amazon warehouse had the atmosphere of what I've imagined a prison would feel like. Which sounds kind of like hyperbole. It sounds like I'm exaggerating, but it was you were given disciplinaries if you took days off sick, even with notes from the doctor. People were given disciplinaries for taking too long going to the toilet. You had to go through airport-style security every time you went on break or every time you went to the toilet. So, taking off your belt, your watch. You had to be drug and alcohol tested. There were all these kind of, you were constantly monitored by and surveilled by the management. you were underpaid, so we weren't paid the minimum wage for half the time I was working there. One girl I interviewed was paid 62p an hour, and it took her 6 weeks to get the money back over Christmas. There was all this stuff going on, and as soon as I got in there, my instinctive reaction was like, why does no one know about this? And then there was kind of a zeal attached to the project to kind of tell the story of the stuff that was going on there. And it was a similar. Amazon was the worst in that respect, but there were similar things that were true when I worked in social care in Blackpool, when I was an Uber driver in London, and when I was in a call center in South Wales. It was revelatory to me, more than, before I told the story to anyone else. It really like shocked me first of all.
And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, how can they get away with paying lower than the minimum wage? How can they possibly do that? It's surely not legal, is it?
No, it's completely illegal. I mean, there's several reasons. So on the one hand, it's the agency who pays your wages. So Amazon management would be the people who we dealt with for things like, like if you take a day off sick or whatever, or just productivity targets, it'd be the Amazon management. But then you had an employment agency would deal with the payroll things. And they would put down the underpayment of wages to incompetency, which isn't an excuse. I mean, you're still breaking the law. But most of the people I was working with were migrant workers. So some of them couldn't speak very good English, so how are they expected to phone up payroll or whatever? And the agency themselves would just fob you off and say, oh, you'll receive the rest of your money next week or whatever. And just didn't expect to encounter people like undercover journalists and people like me in there, who would then tell the story of what was going on. But it felt like there's a law there with the minimum wage, but for some people in our society, it exists mainly on paper. Does that make sense?
Well, if you don't know what the law is, because you've come from Romania and you don't even speak the local language very well, right? You're not going to know what the law is. You're not going to have the ability to have it enforced on your behalf. And the other thing about the precariousness of what you talk about in the book is these people are under constant threat of losing their job for going to the toilet. What would happen if they actually start demanding their workers' rights?
Yeah, I mean, there's the fact that you're dealing with the management is dealing with migrant workers makes it their hand feels weaker in a sense, because on the one hand they don't necessarily understand what the law of the land is in Britain in terms of employment rights. When you get a payslip, it doesn't say what the minimum wage is, but it doesn't print the minimum wage on the payslip, which is one thing I've been saying that would be a really easy change the government could make to make sure everyone knows what the minimum wage actually is. And the employment agency, the representatives of that agency were really elusive as well. So it'd be hard to find them often, hard to get hold of them. And they would just rudely like fob you off if you ever inquired about your pay. I mean, the young woman who was paid so grossly underpaid, 62p an hour, she told me it took 6 weeks to get the money back from the employment agency, and that was only because her mum was phoning up all the time, threatening to like go to ACAS. And she said she would have been screwed and homeless if she hadn't lived with her mum. It just felt like they just didn't care, and they were complacent in the sense that they wouldn't assume someone like me was in the warehouse for a start, and they know that none of those people have any kind of voice in the media or whatever. They're not going to be. You're not going to see some kind of migrant worker from a warehouse in the West Midlands in this small town of Rugeley, which no one's ever heard of, writing a column in the newspaper damning their treatment at work. You just don't really see that. So I guess that's partly why it was allowed to go on.
And was everybody in the warehouse on 0 hours contracts?
Not everyone in the warehouse. All the people I worked, we all were. So all the people who did the job I did were. So, if you're in a managerial role, you're not on a 0 hours contract. But all of us, we worked for there were two employment agencies. There was Transline and PMP. And all of us were on 0 hours contracts. So Amazon says, we don't employ people on 0 hours contracts. But no, because they employ them through an agent. The agency employs them on 0 hours contracts. So this means, we worked like 4 days a week, 10.5 hours each day. And then I remember one Thursday we were told the warehouse was going to be closed on the Saturday, just for maintenance, whatever that was. And because you're on a 0 hours contract, that can happen. So you're down, your wages are down kind of you lose 10.5 hours that week. So yeah, we were all on 0 hours contracts.
And for our American listeners and viewers who may
Hey
not...
man, it's not just American. We've got Malaysian followers now.
Yeah, we're big in Malaysia. We're going global, James. But so for our international viewers and listeners, what is a 0 hours contract, and why do you think they are such a toxic thing to our employment?
Yeah,
rights?
0 hours contracts is basically you have no guaranteed hours each week, but typically you can't get another job as well. So with the company, you're employed by this company, so you can't claim like Social Security, you can't get another job, but you don't know what you're working necessarily from week to week in terms of hours. So one week you might be working 5 hours, the next week you might be working 35 hours, and it's not always bad because I had a 0 hours contract when I was a student. I was a postman as well, and during like term time, I would just work 5 hours on a Saturday. Then during my holidays, I would work kind of full time. But the problem is many of the 0 hours contracts are used to basically control the workforce. So you have a sense where you have a situation where sometimes people are just getting 1 or 2 hours a week, and then they can't get another job at the same time. They're constantly on call. And they also can't sign on for Social Security. So you're not making much money. You can't get another job. You're kind of in limbo, really. And if you leave your job, if you quit the job, you can't then sign on for Social Security because you've left voluntarily. Whereas, to get job seekers allowance, say, to get Social Security, you need to have lost your job kind of involuntarily. You can't just quit and then go sign on anymore. So you have lots of people stuck in this kind of limbo where they're not getting enough hours, not making enough money, and then often the state has to then subsidise that through like tax credits, etc. Anyway, and yet you also have this insecurity hanging over their heads where they're not getting enough. They don't know where the money's coming from week to week.
On the plus side, Amazon are very good at paying tax.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's not as if they're not yeah.
Well, I wanted to dig into that a little bit later, but tell us more about. You're working in this warehouse. You've got a device like a mobile phone, right, or something like that, a handheld device that's tracking your every movement. It's keeping an eye on how long you're spending working. It's keeping an eye on how long you spend going to the toilet. It's keeping an eye on all this stuff, and it's all used to measure your productivity, essentially, right? So you're treated very much like a robot, like a cog in the machine. What other kind of things, just for people at home, because when you talk about, you almost kind of, we almost glanced over this idea that you're working in this place, and if you get ill, and you have a doctor who says James is ill, and you call in and say I'm ill, you are still being disciplined for that, right?
Yeah.
So that's crazy. That is crazy, right? So what other kind of stuff that is happening in these places that people don't know about?
Yeah, the sickness policy was one of the most shocking things. So I took it. I was actually ill one day. Had a very heavy cold. Tried to work through it. Then I wanted to test out what the policy actually was. So the following day, I phoned in the morning. They said you had to phone in. I think it was 3 hours before. I did that, and also said, I can go to the NHS walk-in centre, get a note from the doctors if you need that as well. And they said on the phone, that's fine. You don't need that. You phoned us. You let us know. Then when I went in the next day, this Amazon rep came round with a clipboard. Looking for me and said, can you confirm you were off sick yesterday? And then he said, I've been given a point for this. It's like, what's that? It's a disciplinary point. If you get sick, you lose your job. And I queried it and said, this doesn't seem fair because I was genuine. I was still kind of ill when I was there. You could see this. And said about the doctor's note, and he said, it doesn't matter. His reasoning was, this is what Amazon have always done. As if, it's like in school where the teacher's like, because I said so. It's like, it doesn't tell me anything. That was the justification. And there were also things like, I noticed that the beginning of every shift, you'd have this you'd have almost like a team meeting. They'd give you like a briefing before they sent you out to the warehouse. And they would keep talking about this thing called idle time, like you're clocking up too much, as they call it, idle time. And it's like, what is this? And then I remember I was told one day, you have too much idle time on your device because it measures where you are, productivity, etc., what you're doing. And it dawned on me, eventually this is just the time. You have like 10 minutes idle time, say, during a shift, and that's just a toilet break. It's like, because to go on the toilet, we had 2 toilets on the bottom floor of this huge warehouse, 700,000 square foot warehouse. 2 toilets on the bottom.
That's like 10 football pitches.
Yeah, they always boast about it being like 10 football pitches for some reason. Yeah, like a phallic like boast. And like the 2 toilets are on the bottom floor, and you have to go down 4 flights of stairs because there's 4 floors. I was on the top floor, and you have to go through security to go to the bathroom, which takes airport style security. So you know it takes time to go through, and then so going to the bathroom takes 10 minutes, typically about 10 minutes, and people are being given disciplinaries for idle time, and it's just taking bathroom breaks during a 10.5-hour shift. So you need to take bathroom breaks, right? If you don't drink enough water, you get a headache because you're walking 10 miles a day. Yeah, I mean that was shocking. I mean you had half an hour break and then 2 10-minute breaks. And by the time you get to the canteen on these breaks, you're getting like 15-minute break for the half an hour break, and then you get an extra 5 minutes for the added on to the 10-minute breaks. But you have about 7 minutes break when you get to the canteen through security and stuff. So you're hardly getting any break time. The productivity targets were insane. I'm someone who goes to the gym, who's relatively fit and healthy. And I was told the first week that I was in the bottom 10% of productivity, and I was running around this warehouse. You get disciplinaries for running, even though you have to run to meet your productivity targets. And this whole state of affairs is kind of plastered over with this verbiage, this nonsense about, you're not allowed to call the warehouse a warehouse, you have to call it a fulfillment center. If you, it's like a cult. And if you, I was already in the Labour Party, so I don't need to be too close. If you lose your job, you're not fired or sacked, you're released.
Well, it sounds like you are released from quite a bad situation, actually.
Yeah, we used to joke, you've been promoted to a customer.
Because you get called an associate, right? Is that
yeah,
right?
and it's you're not workers, but there's no workers, bosses, or management. You're all associates. You're
on the same level as Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, we were told, like word for word, Jeff Bezos is an associate, and so are you. We're all one big happy family here at Amazon.
Do you reckon,
on the first day, we were told.
Do you reckon Jeff Bezos makes 62p an hour?
Well, yeah. I think he probably does. Well, that's what he declares anyway.
That probably is what he declares,
to the authorities. Well, there's one question I wanted to ask. Why airport security just to go to the toilet?
So they can't steal shit.
Yeah, it's concerns about theft. It's purportedly
See, this is how you know I'm
theft.
Russian. I know exactly how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposedly concerns about theft that, if you treat people that poorly, they're going to nick stuff, and I can see the rationale of that. If you pay 62p an hour, you probably got to nick stuff to survive. So I don't know. Some people will say human nature, whatever it is. Some people don't. They think they're paranoid all the time that you're going to nick stuff. So they have this security you've got to go through every time you go to the bathroom, or go and break or leave.
And what was the atmosphere like in the warehouse, the morale?
Fulfillment center.
Oh, sorry, fulfillment center. Were they fulfilled?
A lot of the time you weren't allowed to. I mean, there was also a prohibition on talking to your people you were working with, so you had to do that surreptitiously. The morale. I mean, the atmosphere was like some kind of low rent kind of prison or something. It was people would not be there very long. Most people. So it was easy to get fired. So if you got 6 points, you'd lose your job, and you were getting points for. I mean, some people got points because the bus was late. The Amazon bus bringing them in was late, so they clocked in late, and then they all got given points for this, for clocking in like 15 minutes late. If you're off sick, you get a point for too many toilet breaks, point for low productivity. Then you're on 4, 5, 6 points. You're gone. All the jobs are temporary 9-month contracts anyway, so you're not seeing people. You see some people, like you make a friend, and then a few days later they've just vanished. And it's they've been fired or they've just quit because they can't stand it anymore. So people just walking around with these trolleys like drones almost, just super tired. Your feet kind of extremely sore because of the distances you have to walk. You're not provided special footwear. And it was, I worked in a yogurt factory once, and I worked in a toilet paper factory once. And it's like morale in those places isn't like, it's not like some party every day, but this was something else. This was it's just people who know they're being exploited, mostly Romanian migrants who would, on various occasions, would compare it to me to modern slavery. I wouldn't use those terms because I thought, oh, that's a bit strong. But they would say, no, this is like, we feel like slaves. We feel like slaves. It was just, it was just completely like eye-opening. I've never really seen anything like that in the UK, anyway.
And what responsibility do you think customers have who buy from Amazon and, and they go, well, it's cheap, I get the book that I want, it's convenient. Do we have responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, there are like a million. There's like infinite ways to kind of rationalize why it's fine. Why I need this Amazon Prime thing, or I need this book like instantly. And I've done it before. Like I had Amazon from like 2003 or some time around then, and it's I'd be getting these super quick deliveries, not as quick as now, and would never kind of never really think about what was going on down the supply chain. In the same way that 100 years ago, Britain had an empire, and you have all this stuff being bought and sold in kind of the colonies and benefiting basically British consumers, and just don't ask any questions and it's fine. But then when you start to delve into it, like as I did and as other people have, you kind of realize that it has consequences. This kind of the speed, the cheapness, there's a cost to it, and the cost is borne by people in these warehouses, people along the supply chain, who conveniently we don't hear from most of the time. That was one of the reasons I did the book, so we could just kind of give those people some kind of voice, and actually find out, kind of shove it down the throats of people who, consumers who don't think about this stuff in the nicest possible way.
And in the book, you don't just talk about Amazon. So tell us about some of the other jobs that you took on for this research.
Yeah, so I was social carer, so like domiciliary care. So that's like visiting house to house in the town of Blackpool. So driving around in my car, you're kind of on a 0 hours contract again. It's 20-minute care visits for elderly and disabled people, typically. So you'd be working from about 7 in the morning till 2 with a 2 hour break, and then 4 till 10 in the evening, roughly, on a typical day. It's looking after people who can't...
Wait, just hold on. So you started work at 7 in the morning, and you finished work at 10 in the evening?
Yeah, you have a break in the middle, but oftentimes you don't take the break because you can't get everything done if you take the full break, because you have 20-minute care visits, right? You go to Blackpool has a high rate of like health problems, MS particularly. So you have lots of disabled and elderly people. Lots of people move there to retire, so they went to Blackpool for their summer holidays, and they think this is a lovely place to retire. So you have a high elderly population as well. So you have lots of people also low incomes where their care is subsidised by the local authority. You're visiting them. You're going, say, 7 in the morning. You're getting them out of bed. You're taking them to the bathrooms, use the toilet, washing them, making them tea, preparing their breakfast, dressing them, either taking them back to bed if they're very, if it's palliative care, say, or you're taking them to the living room, putting their favourite TV programs on, whatever it is, and giving them medication, filling out the paperwork, all of this within like 20 minutes, which is, in practice, almost never possible, never achievable. It's very hard to do that within 20 minutes. So then say you do it within 20 minutes, you have 10 minutes then to drive to your next appointment. You're not paid for the 10 minutes, so you're only paid for the 20-minute blocks of care visits. So you're basically paid below the minimum wage again, because driving from house to house, it's work time, right? You're in your work uniform. You're not doing other things. You're going from workplace to workplace, but you're not paid for that. So that answers the question, I guess, about, are you working all the time? No, because you're getting all these 10-minute breaks all the time. And you're working through your proper breaks because you can't do all of that stuff within 20-minute care visits. And that was the most... So one care worker told me, they feel like they're treated like glorified cleaners. No disrespect to cleaners, but the level of responsibility you have as a carer is a different kind of job. And you're basically looking after people who fought in the Second World War, fought in the Korean War, and you're treating them like dirt because the care system is screwed, basically. So that's what I did in Blackpool. Then I went to South Wales, where I worked in a call centre for Admiral. that was the least bad job. I mean, Admiral made an effort actually to make you feel okay. Like I think my book has more kind of credibility in that when a company does treat you well and does do things to make it a bit better, the workplace, I'm completely honest about it. I don't necessarily try and paint them as like these employers as these demons. Like Admiral treated us fairly well. The job was poorly paid still. It was very commission dependent. So if you didn't make your commission, you wouldn't have much money that week. But they made an effort to actually try and make the workplace a more pleasant place, which was in contrast to say Amazon. Then from South Wales, I came back to London and I worked as an Uber driver for 2.5 months. I think it was 2.5 months. Yeah, and that was again, it was easier in some respects in that if I don't want to work one day, I just don't turn my phone on, which is I don't have some boss like on my case all the time. But it was not very much like self-employment, despite the kind of.
Because that's the argument, really, isn't it? It's flexibility, gives you the opportunity
be your
to
own
do
boss.
Yeah, right. So it's not like that?
No, so I mean, there was, again, Uber, it was coming back into a world where there was all this language which kind of blurred the distinction between the reality and, there was like the rhetorical universe and the flesh and blood universe, and the two were very, very different. So, be your own boss. We kept hearing from Uber on our induction day. Autonomy, flexibility. If the wheels aren't turning, you aren't earning, all of this like crap. Like vomit-inducing trash. And then, but also, and you'd sacrificed for this autonomy. You didn't receive a minimum wage. You didn't receive holiday pay, sick pay or annual leave, and autonomy actually didn't really exist beyond turning your phone on and off, beyond logging in and out of the app. So we were told during our induction, you have this induction day at Uber before you go out, where they teach you how to use the app, etc. And we were told by this kind of hip guy in jeans and t-shirt, trying to, like the sort of person I see around Shoreditch or Hoxton, like hipster.
I knew they were fucking evil.
Like kombucha drinking hipster. That that we weren't allowed to pick and choose which jobs we did. So whatever job Uber sends you, you have to accept it. So that was the words they used. You can't pick and choose what jobs you do. Which that doesn't sound like self-employment. If you're actually self-employed, that's what you do it. Like I'm a self-employed journalist. If I don't want to do a job, I can say, lad, that's not worth my while to do it based on the money or whatever. We were even told what we were allowed to talk about with the passengers in the back of our car. So you're not allowed to talk about politics, religion or sport, which that is like all cab drivers do talk about, isn't it, right?
Racism's not on the list. You can
you can still tell a racist joke.
Still do that.
And if your rating fell below 4.7 stars, the customer leaves you a rating 1 to 5 stars every time they have a ride. If it fell below 4.7 stars, you ran the risk of being deactivated, so fired. Fired.
All of the shit, it just sounds like it's from some kind of novel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet, we are here in London, other people watching this maybe, using the Uber, buying stuff on Amazon. We're all buying these Primark t-shirts that are made by slave laborers, wherever they are, right? We've all got phones that are made by Chinese people who are jumping out of factories to just because they hate it so much, with precious metals mined by slaves in Africa, whatever. And on the one hand, it's terrible. On the other hand, I don't see, like, literally, I'm just being honest, as I sit here right now, I'm listening to all this and I'm going, this is horrible. What can I do about it? Fuck all.
Leave the Uber driver a tip. Nice big tip. Yeah. But that I joke, but that is actually like one of the worst things about when I was driving for Uber is once you take out all your expenses, you basically earn just over the minimum wage, less than the London living wage. So it was £8 something an hour. It worked out. Once I'd subtracted car insurance for private hire drivers, like 70 odd pounds a week, three grand a year, which is quite high. Cost of washing the car regularly, like valeting it regularly. So, I mean, one thing you can do is leave Uber drivers a tip, even if it's just a few pounds, like every time you use it, because they're not making enough money. Don't leave them 5-star ratings, unless someone was like really horrible, there's some real reason not to. Leave them a 5-star rating just as standard. Things like this can, and also when there's a court case going on now with Uber drivers are like in the final stage. I think it goes to the High Court where the drivers have claimed they're not really self-employed, based on the kinds of things I've told you today. And Uber's lost 2 court cases, and it's going to the High Court. And whether Uber drivers should be classed as self-employed contractors or workers. So there's self-employed, workers, and then employees. It's like a mid-category. So they would then be entitled to the minimum wage and annual leave. And so I'd say, follow the case, and there are ways to support the trade unions which are pursuing that case. I mean, like if you just look into it, there are ways to offer support to those drivers who are saying that they're not actually self-employed.
I guess my point more broadly, though, is I feel like that is something that requires a systemic solution because take your book, it's on Amazon, right? And you've talked about the fact that you had to put it on Amazon because otherwise no one would publish it. Right? Yeah. So the power of these massive, and I'm not saying that as a kind of you're a hypocrite kind of thing, because I totally get it, because it's a trap. We're all in this trap. These corporations have so much power now, and they have such a hold over the running of our societies, the market for these goods, the market for these services, the market for this labor, that we're all trapped in it. And I guess the question is there anything that even at the government level we can do about it now?
Yeah, I mean, I thought you were going to be every book talk I do. There's always one person who says, "Oh, your book's for sale on Amazon," and it's like they think no one's ever asked me that before. Yeah, and it's this brilliant gotcha. But no, I thought you were going to do that.
No,
I was about to walk out.
But I told you, man, it's not what we do here. We really just want to get to the bottom of it. And what I see, and I think what a lot of people see, Andrew Yang is a presidential candidate in America who's talked about automation and the impact that's going to have, is all of this shit is trapping us into the system from which there is no escape. And the problem, as Francis said very accurately, they don't pay tax. So even the benefits of automation, of all of this stuff, of slave driving Romanians to work harder and harder on this, we're still not seeing the benefits of that as a society. That's just going into the pockets of billionaires.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's only in Luxembourg because geographically it's in the center of Europe. It's not because of the tax. That's that's their argument.
I'm sure they do loads of sales in Luxembourg. It's a huge market, isn't it?
It's a great country. Lots to do there.
If you're a tax advisor, especially.
Yeah, I mean, the Amazon in terms of the book thing is I get this question all the time, and the first answer is that my publisher wouldn't publish me if I said I'm not going to sell. I refuse to sell it on Amazon. They just find someone else to do it because Amazon's the biggest book distributor. If any book which boycotts Amazon, typically it's going to bomb. It's not going to, because that's where most people buy their books now. And the idea that it's hypocritical is also it kind of falls down because authors don't benefit from this. Amazon discounts heavily, therefore authors are getting a smaller cut from those books which are sold, and second-hand books, obviously. So you get kind of, I got screwed in the warehouse, then screwed by when I put my book for sale on Amazon as well. And it's a case of, with audiobooks, pretty much everyone gets their audiobooks from Audible now, which is an Amazon company. So a publisher cannot put a book on Audible, but then just no one's going to see it or buy it. It's almost a monopoly, basically. So you don't really have a choice as a producer, of books and whatever, not to put it on those things. And you see that kind of that creep into other areas, like they want to get into Amazon, and other companies want to get into healthcare now. They have all this data on us. They're also with Google, etc. and ads, they're also selling us things based on data they have about us. Selling us things almost. You're kind of buying things almost subconsciously because you're being bombarded with these ads that from this data they've accumulated about us. It's like, that isn't my area, but you can see where it's kind of going.
Oh, we've had people on the show. We had a good friend of mine, Pippa Malmgren, who's a former presidential advisor, has her own tech company now, talks about all this stuff. But the question for me is, what do we do about the power of these corporations and the way that they're treating people, and the fact that as consumers, I mean, you can tell people don't use Amazon, right? But it's like saying to people, don't go outside. as a solution to a particular problem. It's not going to work because of as I said, the power that they've now accumulated, right? So is there something that the government can do? Is there something that, do we need some kind of legislation in place to deal with these things? Is there a solution that you think that might work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think like consumer boycotts are the be-all and end-all of taking on these companies which treat people like this. Like, I mean, personally, I think one of the things that's missing in, say, the Amazon warehouse is there's no trade union in there. I mean, if you have, this is part of a broader question of kind of the kind of death of kind of grassroots, like aisles of like working class democracy, whether that be kind of social clubs, whether that's trade unions, whether even like religious organizations, the kind of like, and this isn't necessarily left-wing arguments. So Edmund Burke, the little platoons, where you have these kind of small kind of organizations where you can kind of have that democratic kind of forum, like at a grassroots level, and you need to make it easier for trade unions to get into places like Amazon, because at the moment, if you go giving out trade union forms in the car, even in the car, this huge car park of Amazon, you're chased off by security, filmed, the police are called, just to give out forms to tell workers what their rights are. And if you have workers organising themselves in these places, government has to do less as well. So you don't need the government kind of constantly having to send people from HMRC to these companies, because it becomes an organic self-regulating thing. If you have a union which is willing to talk with management, but willing to also strike when some of these things, ridiculous things are going on in these workplaces. But you have to, empowering people in themselves, the very people who are working in these places is I think what we need to do. Because if you just legislate from top down, if you just pass these laws, sometimes they only exist on paper, because as we've talked about already, the people in those places either don't know the law, have no means to actually enforce them. Whereas if you get workers banding together and organising themselves, you can actually take a stand against some of this stuff. But that's kind of, the trade union movement has been partly the fault of the unions themselves, partly the fault of legislation and the changing nature of work. The union movement's been declining for the last kind of 30, almost 40 years, I guess now.
And James, when you were telling me this, again, and you were explaining, it's really terrifying. It's very, very scary. Do you think that we're moving towards that sort of future where the majority of jobs are going to be like that, and it's only going to be a select few that are actually protecting, you've got workers' rights, as we compete more and more with China and all the other countries?
I mean, it's certainly possible with the kind of, there was a very good book I read recently called The Globotics Revolution. And it was about kind of how we really failed, the last period of disruption, like deindustrialization, say the 80s and 90s. I mean, I visited some of those places in the book, say South Wales. We really failed to, it left such an appalling legacy in many parts of the country. So in Blanno Gwent in South Wales, you still have 1 in 6 people on antidepressants, which is a legacy of kind of worklessness since the pits and the power stations and steelworks were all closed, not all, but mostly closed very, very rapidly. And people didn't get new jobs and kind of just stagnated and got ill and etc. And his argument, this book argues that, if we fail this time with the next big wave of disruptions coming in terms of jobs being outsourced to, say, you can get translation, you can get a Chinese graduate to translate a piece of work now for you over the internet at a fraction of the price of what people are doing it for in Britain. So these jobs are going, you have automation, robots doing people's jobs. And if we deal with this disruption as poorly as we dealt with the last wave of disruption, you will have this situation where it's not just, there are kind of waves of middle class people thrown out of work as well. So you will have this big kind of section of the population which is doing just unskilled work, such as I've done in the book, which is poorly remunerated. You lack kind of security. You can't get a house or something or a mortgage on this stuff, and those people are typically very angry, and then there's a political backlash from that, as we've seen. This book argues that Brexit is partly the kind of the delayed kind of backlash to the last wave of the last disruption. So you have these people in places like Sunderland, places like South Wales, where deindustrialization, over a period of years, has left these kind of angry, middle-aged kind of men, basically, who've not been able to work, who feel like society's left them behind. And they've kind of kicked back against the system with Brexit. In the States, with the election of Trump, places in say, France or Eastern Germany, by voting for Marine Le Pen or the AfD in Germany. And it can only get worse if more and more people are put through that kind of disruption. If it's the biggest section of society is put through that disruption, the worse the political backlash will be. And you could again see something like in the 1930s. I know this is always bandied around and like, several years ago, people comparing Trump to Hitler and all this ridiculous like nonsense. But if there's that much economic disruption, it's usually followed by nasty political extremism, whether usually the far right, and then followed by kind of Stalinism and all this crap as well. So
well, this is the thing is like we talked about Andrew Young a bit earlier. This is one of the things that he talks about is that if you look at the election of Donald Trump, the states that he won, that he really needed to win, were the states where 4 million jobs, I think he talks about, were automated away. And it's only going to get much, much worse now. Shopping malls are going to close, trucking jobs are going to go, as you say, middle class, like translation, a lot of legal documents just get drafted automatically now or will be in the next 10 years. So it's going to get worse. And this is why it has to be talked about and it has to be addressed. And it's not just a right, like, you talk about from the left, but to people on the right, I would say as well, look at the Romanians who are working in that Amazon warehouse, right? They are the reason that to some extent people are concerned about the levels of immigration because we've had a lot of immigration. And, if we weren't creating these conditions in which most British people wouldn't even want to work, right, you wouldn't have these people coming over here in the first place. So it's not a left versus right issue. This is an issue that's going to affect everybody, isn't it? I mean, it's a huge issue.
Can I just interrupt? What's your day job, Konstantin?
I don't have one. I'm a full-time comedian. And trigonometry.
And trigonometry, but you also...
I used to be a translator.
Yeah, you used to be a translator. So give money to give money to Konstantin, basically.
No, but actually, I mean, before I stopped doing it, pretty much, it was automation's happening, man. You put something into Google Translate, it does as good a job as like 90% of translators.
Really?
Yeah, for basic things. If you just want to understand the meaning of a text, it's enough.
Wow.
And it's only going to continue. So lots of people are going to lose their job. But let's talk about the political side of this. When you wrote the book, it came out last year, right? 2018.
Yeah.
What was the response to that, first of all, from the companies involved and also from the wider public, politicians, etc.?
I mean, the response from the companies, it varied from, extremely hostile to no response. So Amazon it was extremely hostile. So anytime I was on the TV or on the radio, they would, put out a statement. First of all, it was disputing kind of specific things. Like James only worked at Amazon like 9 days or something. But it's like this is spread over the month, so it's like in shifts. So it kind of doesn't make any difference. It doesn't really mean anything. Then things like we don't have any. We don't employ people on 0 hours contracts at Amazon. Which, you get an agency to employ people on 0 hours contracts. Then it became about, James only wrote this book to get publicity. It's nothing you can prove or disprove. It's just, James only wrote this, sensationalized his stuff to sell books, and what can you say to that? And my job is to sell books, but that doesn't mean I'm making things up. As I said, when companies didn't behave like that, I was very honest about that. And as a journalist, your job is bound up with the integrity of what you write. So the idea that I'm going to go and make stuff up and put my whole reputation on the line to say that people at Amazon were afraid to go to the toilet, to just make that up, is nonsense. And it's all backed up by surveys that have been done of the workers in these warehouses. So a group called Organized did a survey of workers in the Rugeley Amazon warehouse I worked in, found 74% of people who worked there were afraid to go to the toilet because of productivity targets. So then when I find a bottle of urine in the warehouse, a Coke bottle filled with urine in the warehouse, because someone's been afraid to go to the toilet, it makes sense. It's not like I'm just making something up. It's like you can see the situation why this is going on. So Amazon, it's been very hostile. They've not owned, as it were, their mistakes, in my view. they increased the minimum wage for their workers in British and American warehouses last year. But it was only after a slew of negative publicity from my book, from the GMB trade union. Bernie Sanders did this big campaign against Amazon. Then suddenly they realized that maybe they're not paying people enough money. And Jeff Bezos, portrays it as this great act of philanthropy on his part, when he's basically just been shamed into doing it. Uber haven't responded at all, presumably because they'd say that they don't employ anyone. So, Admiral haven't responded, presumably because I was fairly generous towards them. So it kind of speaks for itself. And the care company, they didn't respond specifically to. They just said something like, we do our best in a difficult environment. We don't necessarily agree with the representation of the sector that James has portrayed in the book. But it wasn't kind of that hostile or anything. That was like one time they said this. But yeah, Amazon's been the most hostile.
Have there been any politicians who took this as something to work on, to run on, to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I've almost forgotten that because most of that was last year. I mean, I did some videos with Bernie Sanders in the States, which was pretty cool. We did some. We're
losing viewers by the second as you're talking. Bernie Sanders, socialism.
Yeah. So
and look, neither of us is a big fan of socialism, but this, like I say, this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that's going to affect everybody.
Yeah. So I mean, I did some videos with Bernie Sanders, but then I've got some endorsements on my book from conservative. I can't remember who now, but there are there's conservatives endorsed my book. I've been to speak at like conservative think tanks. I also speak to pension investment funds, businesses about this stuff. So it's not just being on the left that makes you want to see people treated with dignity and respect and have some security in their lives. I think that's the book isn't a polemic. It isn't like it isn't a sermon. It isn't something you read in the newspaper with the Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. It's kind of more a moral argument that just because you don't go to university, just because you don't leave the town you're born in and brought up in, just because you're not, say, necessarily academic, doesn't mean you're any less of a human being. Doesn't mean you deserve to be treated in this way that people are treated often in the book. It's a very straightforward, a very simple argument that I think anyone, wherever they stand politically, can. Well, unless you believe in the works of Ayn Rand, I guess it's you can buy into that. I think
she's a great writer, to be fair.
Yeah.
Guys, we wanted to tell you we're very excited to say we've got a new sponsor, which is HelloFresh.
Indeed, we have. HelloFresh is the UK's leading recipe box service, delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and step-by-step recipes to your door.
It is the easy, convenient way to cook delicious dinners from scratch every single time.
Choose your favorites from 19 recipes every week.
They have a whole range of options there for you, including recipes that are ready in under 20 minutes. There's family favorites, there's British cuisine, there's world cuisine.
HelloFresh are offering TRIGGERnometry fans £60 off 4 boxes.
To take advantage of that, go to hellofresh.co.uk, enter our special code, which is of course TRIGGERnometry, and enjoy delicious dinners without any of the drama.
The fresh ingredients come direct from suppliers, i.e. they've been picked by Constantine's family.
You can tell Francis studied geography at a British school because you can't tell the difference between Russia and Romania.
Doesn't matter, mate. Same thing. Brexit means Brexit. And the great thing is, it's been pre-portioned for you, so there's no food waste, just like in my home country of Venezuela. The great thing with HelloFresh is that you're going to be able to choose from 19 different recipes every week. So there is something for everybody. You're going to be able to eat with your kids. There's going to be no fuss. Dinner time is going to be solved.
Yeah, I really like the Rapid Box, which allows you to cook things in under 20 minutes. But the great thing about HelloFresh as well is it actually allows you to open up your cooking range. So most households on average have about 6 recipes that they cook regularly. HelloFresh has up to 19, so you can kind of expand a little bit in terms of your cooking. And of course, they also don't have a fixed subscription, so there's no term. You can cancel, you can skip weeks, you can change the size of the box, you can change delivery address, you can do all kinds of stuff to suit your life. To enjoy delicious moments, head over to hellofresh.co.uk, choose your box, choose your delivery slot, and add your favorite recipes.
Discover the easy way to get delicious dinners from scratch. And if you do that, you'll get sick abs just like me. HelloFresh are offering Trigonometry fans £60 off 4 boxes.
To take advantage of that, go to hellofresh.co.uk, enter our special code, which is of course Trigonometry, and enjoy delicious dinners without any of the drama.
So we've been talking, we've touched on the left now, so you're very much of the left. However, you have had your issues, shall we say, with some members, with people on the left. Where do you see the left at the moment and the way it's progressing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I kind of fallen out with a lot of the left, kind of persona non grata. Basically, I have face tattoos at this point. In terms of, say, I wanted to pursue a career in politics or something. Yeah, that's not happening.
Why is that? Because hang on, we've just been talking about something that is, the left should be everybody, but in particular the left should be absolutely outraged by, and it fits their narrative of these global corporations who don't care about the individual, exploiting them, and you come in and you expose them. Aren't you a hero?
I'm a bit of a troll online, to be fair.
You wouldn't know about that, would you?
I almost put on my strapline on Twitter the other day, like, more left-wing in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I do have genuine beef. I do have a genuine beef with a lot of the left over things like a lot of it revolves around kind of foreign policy stuff. So when years ago I lived in Cuba for 6 months, like 10 years, just over 10 years ago. I saw all kinds of things going on. I saw friends arrested for speaking out against the government, fired from the University of Havana for writing some mildly critical article about the government. People not allowed to leave the country without permission from the state, not allowed to move to different parts of the country without permission from the state. You see what's going on in Venezuela now, and these, like, a few years ago, you have all these kind of people kind of like fanboys of Venezuela saying about Jeremy Corbyn, Owen Jones, it's this is the new model of socialism we need to pursue. Meanwhile...
Oh God, kill me now.
I remember I used to work for this blog, Left Foot Forward, used to edit it. And I remember once Boris Johnson was making this announcement, he wanted to bring water cannons to London. And we were kind of writing this stuff, this is a bad idea. I remember Owen Jones writing this stuff for the newspaper or tweeting, this is a disgrace. Boris Johnson wants to water cannon people in London. Meanwhile, and he'd just written an article about how great Venezuela was, and meanwhile they were actually water canning people in Venezuela, protesters, student protesters.
Yeah, but it's very hot out there. You need to be cooled off.
But apparently, France's mother is from Venezuela. So.
Yeah.
Apparently it doesn't count because they're Venezuelans. And all this kind of, and Syria, Seamus Milne, Andrew Murray, all these people just Assadists support, a million people have been killed in Syria, and they kind of umming and ahhing about whether Assad's used chemical weapons and all this stuff. That stuff is really sickening, I think.
But this is normal, right? I mean, in terms of the left should be a place just like the right and like the center where people have different positions about foreign policy.
Yeah.
They have different positions about...
The Jews.
The Jews, right. They have different views about different kinds of things, right? And used to be, like any party, any political movement, it's a broad church, it's a coalition. On the right, you might have a Ken Clarke conservative and you might have a Jacob Rees-Mogg conservative, and then the same party, even though their views on Brexit, even though their views on many, many things would be completely different. What seems to me to be happening on the left, though, is that, as we kind of touched on, is there is this sense that there is one way, and anyone who departs from that is automatically a heretic, and they have to be exercised from the movement. Is that accurate, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, so academic David Hirsch calls it the community of the good. And if you're a heretic on one of these issues, if your thinking isn't aligned with the orthodoxy, you're cast out of the community of the good. Unless you're Jeremy Corbyn and you secretly support Brexit, but yeah, you're allowed to stay for some reason. A lifelong anti-racist. But yeah, it's very much like that. I think because being on the left, first of all, it's a hangover from Stalinism, which Stalinism as a movement was very much like a teleological movement where if you're if you're wrong about, like Che Guevara said once that he wanted to fire a nuclear weapon at Miami because you're saving the lives of future unborn children or something ridiculous. That's the, I can't remember, I think he said it, but anyway, that's the mentality that you have to be ideologically like perfect because it's a life and death struggle. It's
you look good on a t-shirt though, James.
Yeah. If you're wrong about something, it has these life and death consequences. So if you support austerity, you're responsible for the deaths of like 10,000 people or whatever. I see people posting this stuff on Twitter all the time. You can't have a debate like that on those grounds, because then you have to know if someone's really responsible for the deaths of 10,000 people or whatever, or the deaths of future unborn children, you obviously have to no platform them. If that's murderers, you can't have those people within civilized debate. And once you start thinking like that, the same with no platforming. No platforming feminists now. Some kind of radical feminists are being no platformed on the left because the people who are doing that see this as you're denying someone's right to exist. When you frame things in those terms as this kind of struggle, black and white struggle, this binary struggle of good versus evil, then it becomes very easy to just then completely deplatform, completely kind of exclude people from the community of the good, or in states where that's the ruling ideology, to put them in prison and kill them. I mean, that's what happened in the Soviet Union. And again, you don't need to compare, exaggerate and compare our current situation to that. But there's a way of thinking which, in such kind of simple moralistic kind of teleological terms, where history has this endpoint, and you've got to do what's a mere human being who's excluded from the debate if we're heading towards this glorious socialist future. That way of thinking has permeated kind of thinking on the left, I think, in sections of the left at any rate.
And why do you think that it's come back? Because the way you're talking, it's... my mother's from Venezuela, and that's it. And that's a sign for everybody who listens to the podcast or watches it to have a drink. But why? Why has it come back? Because you think surely it's 2019. We should have seen that these systems don't work. They just simply don't function.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's politics. I mean, we talked about reasons why politics is kind of chaotic right now. I mean, you have these sections of the population heavily disenfranchised. I think, though, on the other hand, I think that, and there's also, I mean, other authors, Jamie Bartlett, for example, who writes a lot about tech stuff. He can talk about things like why society's become more polarized online and the online arena, whatever. But I think it's politics has taken on a kind of religious hue, if you like, again. So it's become much more of a surrogate religion, or as Nietzsche called it, a degenerated Christianity. So you speak to people who are really enthused by Jeremy Corbyn, and what they'll say, oh, Corbyn's giving me a reason to get up in the morning.
Jesus.
but they'll say this to you. Since Corbyn was elected, you hear this all the time. If you go to, I can't go to these things anymore. But if you go to,
I can see why. Jesus Christ.
Momentum thing or whatever, and you speak to, especially some of the older people, it's like a religious mania. It's like he's given them something to get up in the morning, and for many people, this is they get that from religion, but many people on the left get that from the socialist movement. So Oscar Wilde said, I think that, he said that the problem with socialism is it takes up too many evenings. Well, for some people, this is why they like it. Yeah. It's because it gives their life a meaning. Because they don't have things to do in the evenings. They get to go to a meeting. They get to feel like they're changing the world. And
imbues them with a certain morality as well, a sense of we are on the right side of history. We are doing something good. We care about other people.
Yeah, and so personally, I'm kind of an absurdist. I think life has no meaning. I think it's big kind of follower of Albert Camus. I think life essentially has no meaning beyond the meaning which you create for it, and that may not have any intrinsic value in itself. But some people can't accept that. Some people need that feeling that life has some purpose to it, and I think most people probably do. But I think because the world's become more chaotic, seemingly in the last, say, decade since the recession, with the disruption in work and things like the rise of disruptive behavior from Russia, the war in Syria, all of this stuff. When the world's chaotic, you see a gravitation again towards these certainties of whether it's religion or whether it's a surrogate religion, such as, say, communism.
Well, it's interesting talking about socialism. What you were asking, why this ideology is resurgent to some extent. I was trolled by some American socialists on Twitter a few weeks ago. By the time this comes out, because Carlos Maza, the guy who got Steven Crowder banned off YouTube, he tweeted out saying, "Be gay, be socialist, no platform bigots," and I retweeted it and I said, I grew up in a socialist country in the Soviet Union, and you would have been put in prison there for being gay. So how about you just notice that you live in the freest society in the history of the world and be grateful for that? And a bunch of his followers came, and it's all like teenagers.
Really?
Yeah, it's all teenagers. It's all very, very young people. And I think partly that is because there are some genuine problems that you and I have covered on the show a lot, which is, if you're a young person, you can't buy a house.
Yep.
You're not going to earn property. As you talk about your career, you're not going to have a career necessarily. You're going to have jobs, but you're not going to have a career. You don't know what you're going to be doing 10 or 15 years from now in terms of work. You don't know whether you're going to have a job. You don't know whether you're going to have income. So it's an economically and financially very unstable time as well. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's sometimes make a comeback, because it's hard to say to those kids, well, capitalism is great, because it's not great for them. No. You know, so I do think that these issues, which is why I'm so glad you've come on the show, these issues need to be talked about in a rounded way. You can't, look, we've had Toby Young on the show a couple of times, and I like Toby, and I think he has some good ideas, but, you know, when he's just talking about capitalism as a thing that's going to save everything, well, no, it's not. There are going to be people who lose out massively. Yeah. And these things need to be addressed. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, one of the things that's happened on the left, it seems to me, is that I guess I feel like a lot more of them would care about those people that you've written about if their skin color was the right color, and if they were trans, or if they were, you know, LGBT or whatever. And I get the sense that we've become hyper-racialized and hypersensitive to all of these things, and that's driving a lot of the narrative on the left. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think it's basically the decline of the politics of class in a way. In that, I think it's, people think, even people ostensibly of the left are basically liberals in their thinking about class. So they think that's kind of been, even though they may kind of pose as leftists or whatever, they're not really bothered about exploitation in that sense, in the sense of class. So they behave as if that's been kind of, that riddle has been solved. The riddle of kind of class conflicts has been solved, and that, you know, they behave as if society would be fine if in the Amazon boardroom you had, you know, 50% men, 50% women, and, you know, 12% ethnic minorities. Never mind what went on further down the chain. As long as this is, you know, as long as it's representative, then we've kind of solved that. And one trans board member, you've kind of solved this problem. And this kind of attitude kind of permeates a lot of what passes for left-wing politics now. Even if, even from people who purport to be, you know, very radical and very left-wing, they actually want to keep the basic structure of society in place, just make it more representative. And I also think that its identity has become this, identity. Many of the people in my book, many men particularly in my book, who felt very disenfranchised, there was like an identity crisis going on beyond things like deprivation and material poverty. It wasn't just material poverty. There was kind of an identity crisis going on. So to be like a man, say, several hundred years ago, your identity may have been defined by, say, fighting in a war, or, you know, this isn't necessarily, I'm not saying this is a positive thing, or, you know, working in a steelworks or a factory or something as a producer, someone who did things, someone who went on adventures, someone who made things, someone who even, you know, killed things. It's
and again, also provided for their family.
Yeah, and a lot of it revolves around the status of supporting children, supporting your wife, etc. And then that's kind of passed away to some extent. And we've kind of said that, you know, that doesn't matter, because you can derive your identity from being a consumer. So no longer based on what you produce, no longer based on where you go, what you do, who you protect, or whatever, who you support. But now it's just, your identity is derived from what you buy. And this has proven, insufficient for lots of people. There's still people very unsatisfied. It doesn't feel like, you may be able to dress in the attire of your favorite celebrity, but you've still got to go back to your bad job the next day. You've still got all these social problems around you, etc. But at the same time, I think for affluent middle class people, the world of kind of identity politics, that it's all just, it kind of, in some ways, I think it's not really beneficial to them either, but I think it plays into this kind of narcissism of small differences. So, I identify as, you see people with their strap lines on their Twitter profiles, what they identify as. And it's just like, so what? So fucking what? Mm. It's just this narcissism of small differences where you split the differences smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's just a form of hyper-individualism where you're separating up into smaller and smaller groups, which to me is being left-wing is about universalism, is about coming together to fight for kind of common aims. And that seems to me to be the opposite of that. It's about the narcissism of small differences. It's about these ideological wars against all these different smaller factions, whether you're a TERF or whether you're pro-trans or whether you're all of this stuff. And it's to me that's just an extension of what's called neoliberal politics. There's not really much that's left about that at all, to my mind, anyway.
Well, I'm offended. Anyway.
It's good to finish with a bit of toxic masculinity there from James, just outing himself as a typical straight white man, punching down at poor people who self-identify as a fucking rabbit or whatever it is now.
And that sound you can hear, James, is the entire TRIGGERnometry audience standing up and giving you a standing ovation.
Yeah. Not big fans of identity politics on the show, but this is the conversation that needs to be had, man, because the differences between the real left and the real right are much smaller now than the differences between these woke people and everyone else, because they're fucking mental. They've gone off the deep end.
My favourite moments with them is when, like I said, my mother is from Venezuela, and I've had relatives who are journalists who I speak to, and they go, well, I could disappear at any moment, and they then come in and lecture me about Venezuela. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. And on
that happy note,
and in no way makes me want to wrap a chair around their face. Anyway, and on that note,
you should do that sometime. I would totally back you up, man.
Thank you. Oh well, it'll be the last ever episode of TRIGGERnometry. Right. Okay. So the question that we always finish with is the same question. Do you want to give it, Constantine?
Yeah. What is the one thing that we're not talking about as a society that we should be talking about?
I would say, some of the things we've covered already. I would say the kind of identity crisis, particularly among men. But in saying that, I don't mean to exclude people from that conversation. It's not a case of, so you have people who talk about this in a way that does exclude others. So it's not a question of it's just white working class men. I think there's generally an identity crisis in terms of what it means to be a man in the 21st century. I'm going to be looking at this in another book, in a forthcoming book at some point. When I get around to doing that. But it's I think there's if you look at rates of suicide, depression amongst men in especially working class areas, those things tend to be very high, and that debate tends to be sidelined because upper class wealthy white men have often done very well in our society at the expense of other groups very often, particularly women, particularly members of ethnic minorities, but just carte blanche talking about privileged white men. It's another way to give those people who, in terms of the class system, sit at the bottom of that system, giving them another kicking. And I think there's a profound identity crisis at the moment amongst many young men, particularly in America. You see the rise of these movements, the incels, the kind of men's rights movements, which some of that is quite toxic. Some of that really does play up to the toxic masculinity label that's applied to it. But I'm someone who's a socialist, social democrat, socialist still. I like to look at the causes of these things rather than just saying, these are deplorables or bad people. I want to know why people are gravitating towards those movements. Why there's this big rise in kind of so-called involuntary celibates and people who just feel that they're completely alienated from, say, the dating world, from members of the opposite sex, from society in general. And I think there's a big reluctance to talk about that. No one wants to talk about why. So just to kind of finish, I guess, with the incels, say, it's easy to just talk about, they're just losers. They're just losers who just can't find a girlfriend, can't get laid, whatever. And maybe that's true, but why is this phenomenon happening now? Shouldn't we try then to get these people socialized so they can meet members of the opposite or the same sex?
You know, with the program, they're men, man. They're men.
Yeah, it seems to be a very dismissive attitude towards people. Yeah, and I don't think this is healthy at all. And again, I think that's another of those things where just painting it in a very moralistic thing of there's just these bad people, these deplorables. You're just storing up even more problems for the future and even more of a backlash when these people, when these people are just left to kind of rot, essentially.
Yeah. Well, it's a crisis of meaning, because if you take that meaning away from people, they will find their own meaning one way or another. And if you don't give them access to meaning that's healthy and fulfilling and supportive of society, they will find a way to sabotage society. They'll find some kind of meaning or some kind of group that fights against whatever is in existence.
Yeah, I mean, we see this like the rise in, say, like people are attracted to, say, Islamism, like extremist kind of Islamist politics, leaving the UK to go and fight for the Islamic State. Again, it's a search for meaning. It's a search for kind of meaning in a world where you feel alienated from, in a society you feel alienated from, in a society where you feel like you're going through this existential crisis. You can't see any kind of meaning to it, and it's manifested in something extremely negative. There is no solution, the complete solution where you create the perfect society, but you see it again with but we look at that. I mean, we look at that and we assess why these people are attracted to this thing. But then when it comes to why people are attracted to, say, go down this path of hatred and this disillusionment and negativity in terms of young Western men. It's not white. It's not white men. It's a mixture of ethnic groups, but living in the West. Why they're going down this dark path, typically on the internet? We're very dismissive of it. At least mainstream media is very dismissive of it, and just screw them. It's they're privileged. It doesn't matter, but it does matter, and we should not just let people rot on the margins, because it comes back to bite us in the end.
I agree, man. Yeah. 5 years from now, we could see an army of incels just with keyboards on the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. But the plus side would be that they'll be crap at fighting.
Well, that was my point. They're going to be smashing the matriarchy with their keyboards.
Yeah. All right. And so thank James. It's genuinely been a wonderful interview, incredibly illuminating. If somebody wants to find you on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, where would they find you?
So I'm on Twitter at @J_Bloodworth, and I'm on Instagram at James.Bloodworth. Instagram's you'll find me more on Instagram nowadays, because that's the more fun side, more silliness, more fun. I'm trying to get away from Twitter. Can be quite toxic, I find. Whereas my Instagram friends, it's all about just screwing around and having fun. So yeah.
So follow James on that. Buy his book, Hired. It's a great book and very interesting. As you've seen, James has a lot of interesting things to contribute to this debate. As always, follow us at TriggerPod on all social media, and we will see you in a week from now.
Absolutely, and please tell the word subscribe. We are now on BitChute, if you prefer to go onto BitChute, or if that's a platform you like to use. Also, as well, leave us a nice review on iTunes. It really does help. And thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.